All right, we're going to talk about Russia now. Russia was the other, sorry about that. Russia was the other great land empire of Asia. The Ottoman Empire and the Mughal Empire were significant in their respective regions, but neither could match the size and strength of the huge land empires of Russia and China during this era. Russia followed the path of absolute monarchy after the final expulsion of the Mongols in 1480. The Mongol occupation of Russia produced a nation with a weakened emphasis on education, and it also depressed trade and manufacturing. Russia's kind of new revival and entry into world affairs began with Ivan the Great, who ran off the last of the Mongol rulers in the late 15th century. And from that point on, Russian leaders expanded their territory through conquest, first to the east and then across the south and the west. The largest area was to the east across Siberia. And in the 16th century, Ivan the Terrible began a conquest of Siberia that continued for 100 years. Russian pioneers called Cossacks were sent to the newly conquered territories, taking over land previously held by Asian nomads. And in the process of expanding its borders, Russia actually added a substantial Muslim minority to its population. From the late 17th century through the late 18th century, Peter the Great and Catherine the Great added territories north of the Black and Caspian Seas. Russian migrants flooded into these areas, and this greatly changed the cultural makeup of each of these regions. Now, some similarities to China. The Russian Empire ended the era of the nomadic peoples. It insisted on farming instead of pastoralism. They imposed requirements for local peasants to build roads and perform other public work projects. They generally maintained a policy of religious toleration. Yep, and that's about it. Sorry. So, the death of Ivan IV without an heir, or Ivan the Terrible, paved the way for the emergence of the Romanov dynasty. And just kind of side note, Trivial Pursuit, the reason that Ivan the Terrible did not have an heir was because he killed his own son at dinner one night. So he definitely earned the name Ivan the Terrible. Like I said, his death without an heir paved the way for the emergence of the Romanov dynasty. In 1613, the Russian nobles, or boyars, selected Mikhail Romanov as Russia's newest czar, and this began a dynasty that ruled until 1917. The new czar continued Russian expansion, adding part of the Ukraine around Kiev, and also southern territory that extended to the frontier of the Ottoman Empire. Later, Romanovs created state control under the Russian Orthodox Church. As far as trade is concerned, Western European shippers known as factors established agencies in Moscow and St. Petersburg to facilitate trade between Europe and Russia. Now let's talk about the Russian czars, the two Russian czars. Peter the Great. In 1700, the Russian Empire remained agricultural, or to a larger extent than East Asian empires or even Western European nations. And Peter the First, or Peter the Great, ruled from 1689 to 1725, and he launched a new era in Russian history by opening up the country to Western influence. On a trip to Western Europe, in a vain attempt to enlist support against the Turks, Peter acquired an appreciation for Western science and technology. So when he returned to Russia, he took Western craftsmen with him, and in order to bolster trade, he fought a war with Sweden, in which he not only greatly reduced the military power of Sweden, but he also gained for Russia a warm water port in the Baltic Sea. He also moved his capital from Moscow to a new city on the Baltic that he named St. Petersburg, and then he created a navy for Russia. He continued his policy of westernization by requiring boyards to shave their beards and wear Western clothing. He also brought the ballet from France to Russia and allowed women of elite classes to attend public events for the first time. So, those were some positive things that he did. Now, Catherine the Great, or Catherine II, ruled from 1729 to 1796, and she continued the expansionist and westernization policies of Peter. She upheld the concept of absolute monarchy, but she also brought in ideas from the Enlightenment, which we're going to talk about later. She reduced severe punishments for crimes in order to bring the Russian justice system more in line with that of Western Europe and encouraged Western art and architecture. She added new territory in the Crimea, Alaska, and Northern California to the Russian Empire. She famously proclaimed Russia to be a European nation, and this settled, at least for Russian foreign policy, the question of which direction the government would make a priority, Asia or Europe. Which, in fact, Russia's empire occupied both, but mostly it was in Asia. She also invited foreigners to settle in Russia and offered incentives for them to do so. Thousands of immigrants, especially from Central Europe, took advantage of her offer. But even after decades of westernization by Peter and Catherine, two major institutions carried over unchanged into the 19th century, serfdom and absolute monarchies. Neither leader ended serfdom, although Western Europe had done so in the 15th century, nor did they take steps to limit the Tsar's authority by allowing a constitution or by granting power to their parliament as England had done. In fact, Peter the Great was so unimpressed with parliamentary government, he continued to favor the absolute government, and he set up controls over his subjects by creating a secret police and encouraged the continuation of serfdom. And this kept the Russian economy focused on agriculture in spite of the westernization policies of Peter the Great.